On a quiet September night in Glasgow, inside the walls of a Roman Catholic church, a young woman trusted she was safe. The doors were locked, the building was holy ground, and the man working beside her was supposed to be harmless. 3 days later, her body would be found hidden beneath that same church, stuffed through a trap door like something meant to be forgotten. What investigators uncovered next would expose one of the most disturbing serial predators Scotland has ever known. Angelika Kluk was 23 years old. She had come to Scotland from Poland with simple hopes: education, work, and the chance to support her family back home. Like many international students, she took whatever jobs she could find, cleaning offices, studying English, saving every pound. When she was offered part-time work and accommodation at St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Church in the Anderston area of Glasgow, it felt like a blessing. A church meant safety, stability, sanctuary. Angelika lived in the clergy house on church grounds. She cleaned, she studied, she called her family. To those around her, she was quiet, polite, and hardworking. She trusted the people she worked with, especially the church handyman, a soft-spoken man everyone knew as Pat McLaughlin. He was friendly, unassuming, always around. No one questioned him. But Pat McLaughlin was not his real name. On the evening of September 24th, 2006, Angelika was last seen alive inside a garage next to the church. She was painting a garden shed with Pat, just routine maintenance work. No raised voices, no struggle witnessed, no reason for alarm. But somewhere in that enclosed space, something shifted. What followed was swift and brutal. Angelika was attacked with a wooden table leg. Her hands were cable-tied. She was placed on a plastic sheet and dragged inside the church, the very place she believed would protect her. There, she was raped and stabbed 16 times. Still alive, she was forced through a narrow trapdoor into a hidden crawl space beneath the building. The darkness closed in, and Angelika Kluk was left to die alone beneath the altar of a church. When Angelika failed to answer her phone, her boyfriend grew worried. By the next day, worry turned into fear. She had vanished without explanation. Police were notified, and a missing persons investigation began immediately. Officers searched the church grounds, interviewed staff, retraced her steps. But one person was missing from every conversation. The handyman had vanished. 3 days after Angelika was reported missing, the smell led investigators to the truth. Beneath the church floor, accessed by a concealed trapdoor, they found her body. The discovery stunned the city. A murder inside a church shattered any sense of normalcy. This was not just a crime. It was a violation of trust on a sacred level. Inside the garage, police found blood spatter on the newly painted shed. A broken wooden table leg matched Angelika's injuries. Forensic evidence told a horrifying story, one of planning, control, and extreme violence. And whoever had done this knew the building well, knew where to hide a body, knew how to disappear. Police released images of the missing handyman to the public, asking for help identifying and locating him. The man in the photo was labeled Patrick McLaughlin. But within hours, something unexpected happened. A former neighbor saw the image and froze. The man wasn't Pat McLaughlin. It was Peter Tobin. The name sent shockwaves through law enforcement. Tobin was no ordinary suspect. He was a convicted violent offender, a man with a long history of sexual assault, extreme brutality, and disappearing under false identities. For nearly 2 decades, He had drifted across the UK, leaving devastation behind him, often unnoticed, often unpunished. Suddenly, Angelica's murder was no longer an isolated crime. It was part of something much bigger. As police scrambled to track Tobin, they realized just how deeply he had buried himself beneath layers of lies. Dozens of aliases, multiple addresses, years of unchecked movement. The church handyman was only the latest mask, and somewhere out there, Peter Tobin was running again. But this time, he had made a fatal mistake, because he had killed in a place no one would ever forget. Once the name Peter Tobin entered the investigation, everything changed. What police initially believed was a single horrific murder inside a church began to unravel into something far more disturbing, a pattern that stretched back decades, across cities, borders, and buried memories. Tobin wasn't just hiding from the law. He had been hiding in plain sight for most of his life. Born in 1946 near Glasgow, Tobin's childhood was marked by violence, neglect, and cruelty. From a young age, he displayed an alarming lack of empathy. He destroyed property, hurt animals, attacked his siblings, and showed no remorse. Punishment did nothing to change him. Reform schools couldn't contain him. Institutions couldn't correct him. Instead, they hardened him. As Tobin grew older, so did his appetite for control. He drifted across the UK, living in hostels, sleeping rough, taking short-term jobs under false names. He learned how to disappear, how to reinvent himself, and most importantly, how to charm. To strangers, Tobin could appear friendly, hardworking, even gentle. But behind closed doors, his relationships became chambers of terror. His wives and partners would later describe a man who strangled them during sex, raped them, threatened their children, and beat them into silence. One woman watched in horror as Tobin stabbed her puppy to death, then turned the knife on her. Another escaped only by fleeing in secret with her child. Each woman survived, but countless others would not. For years, Tobin remained just below the surface of police awareness. Arrested for forgery, jailed for rape, released, forgotten. Every time he was freed, he changed his name, moved towns, and started again. And with each new beginning came new victims. One of them was 15-year-old Vicky Hamilton. In February 1991, Vicky became lost while waiting for a bus in Bathgate, Scotland. She asked strangers for directions. She dropped her purse. And then she vanished. Her disappearance triggered one of the largest missing person investigations Scotland had ever seen. But no trace of her was ever found. Months later, another young woman vanished. 18-year-old Dinah McNichol. She had accepted a ride from a man who appeared harmless, a father, a family man. That man was Peter Tobin. Dinah was never seen again. At the time, no one connected the dots. But now, in 2006, after Angelica Cluck's murder, detectives began to look backward, and what they saw was horrifying. Operation Anagram was launched, one of the largest serial crime investigations in Scottish history. Detectives traced over 40 former addresses, more than 38 SIM cards, dozens of aliases. Tobin had lived everywhere, and everywhere he went, women disappeared. The red herrings were endless at first. False identities, dead-end addresses, witnesses who remembered Pat or Peter or James, but never the same man twice. But slowly, the puzzle began to form a picture, not of chaos, but of method. Tobin chose vulnerable women, young girls, foreign students, hitchhikers, women who trusted easily, women who wouldn't be immediately missed. He attacked in familiar spaces. He buried bodies close to home, and then he moved on. The most chilling breakthrough came when investigators searched one of Tobin's former homes in Margate, England. A neighbor remembered something odd. Tobin digging an unusually deep hole in his garden. He said it was a sand pit for his son, but the hole was far too deep. When police excavated the garden, they uncovered 2 bodies buried just meters apart. Vicky Hamilton, Dinah McNichol. 15 years after they vanished, the truth finally surfaced from the ground. Suddenly, Angelica Cluck's murder was no longer the end of the story. It was the beginning of the truth. As Tobin was finally arrested, found in a London hospital under yet another false name, he showed no fear, no remorse. When police approached him, he simply said, "I believe you've been looking for me." He was right. They had been looking for him for decades. And now, with bodies uncovered and patterns exposed, the question haunting investigators was no longer if Peter Tobin had killed before, but how many times. With the discovery of 2 bodies buried beneath a child's sandpit, the scale of Peter Tobin's crimes was finally impossible to ignore. What had once been treated as isolated disappearances were now unmistakably linked by a single man, a single method, and a lifetime of deception. The question was no longer whether Tobin was a serial killer. The question was how many victims he had truly left behind. As Operation Anagram expanded, investigators worked relentlessly to retrace Tobin's movements across decades. They sifted through aliases, prison records, employment histories, and former residences. Each new address carried a sense of dread, because every place Tobin had lived was now considered a potential burial ground. Police sealed his former prison cell, preserved his belongings, and re-examined items most would consider meaningless. Clothing, notebooks, jewelry, books, anything could hold a clue. Tobin, meanwhile, sat in custody, silent, calculating, and defiant. Over the next 2.5 years, 3 separate murder trials unfolded. The process was slow, repeatedly delayed by Tobin's failing health and the constant emergence of new evidence. In court, prosecutors laid out a portrait of pure predation, a man who hunted trust, a man who hid behind religion, fatherhood, and false names, a man who used violence not as a means to an end, but as an end in itself. He was convicted of the murders of Angelica Cluck, Vicky Hamilton, and Dinah McNichol, 3 young women, 3 stolen lives, 3 families left with permanent wounds. Tobin received 3 life sentences, later upgraded to a whole life order, ensuring he would never walk free again. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom, cutting through decades of lies and manipulation. You stand convicted of the truly evil abduction and murder of a vulnerable young girl. You have shown yourself unfit to live in a decent society. But even as justice was delivered, the case refused to rest. During the proceedings, another disturbing revelation surfaced. Reverend Jerry Nan, a senior church figure, admitted to having a sexual relationship with Angelica Cluck just weeks before her murder, inside the same church where her body was later hidden. Following this admission, multiple women came forward accusing Nan of abuse. He died 3 years later, taking his own secrets to the grave. For many, this revelation deepened the horror. The church, meant to represent sanctuary, had become a place of exploitation, silence, and death. In prison, Tobin's health deteriorated rapidly. He suffered chest pains, survived an attack by another inmate, endured a stroke, and was eventually diagnosed with cancer. Yet even as his body failed him, His silence remained intact. He never confessed, never explained, never acknowledged more than the 3 murders he was convicted of. He once claimed he had killed 48 women. Whether that was truth, manipulation, or one final act of cruelty remains unknown. On October 8th, 2022, Peter Tobin died in a hospital bed, shackled, guarded, and alone. No family claimed his body. No one mourned him. His ashes were scattered at sea, his final disappearance echoing a lifetime spent vanishing. But Tobin did not take peace with him. As of 2024, investigators continue to review his preserved possessions, his movements, and the long list of missing persons once linked to Operation Anagram. That list was narrowed from 90 names to 9, but even one unanswered disappearance is too many. How many victims did Peter Tobin truly claim? No one knows. And that may be the most disturbing part of all, because while Tobin is gone, the questions remain, buried deep, like the bodies he hid, waiting for the truth to surface. His victims live on not just in court records, but in the spaces he passed through, the lives he shattered, and the silence he left behind. This was not just the story of a killer. It was the story of how evil survives, by blending in, by being trusted, by hiding in places no one thinks to look. And sometimes it takes decades before the ground finally gives up its secrets.